How can you cut down on expenses and still produce a high-quality children's book and prepare for the oncoming recession as a children's book author? We'll talk about that today, so I hope you'll tune in.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi, my name is Travis D. Peterson, and I am a children's book author as well as a book designer. I've been designing for over a decade now, but I've been sort of shifting my focus to children's books over the past few years after writing my own book, Ada and the Helpers. Today, as well as over the next week or so, I want to give you several points on how you can prepare for the incoming recession. Now, there has been a lot of talk about recession. The smoke is in the air, but you know what? I believe that we should not be fearful. We should just be prepared. So that's what I want to show you today. And the very first tip that I have for you is how to cut down on expenses. So I'm going to share a few different ways you can do that. When you're producing a children's book, after you have completed writing your manuscript, there are several vendors that you'll be considering before you're able to publish. The first is the editor, and there are lots of ways to find editors. I just encourage you to compare the rates that editors give. Now, there's lots of different types of editors as well. You have the developmental editor as well as the line editor. Some that take a look at rhyme and meter. So just depending on what kind of story you have, you need to make sure that you get the right editor. And just compare those prices. Now, with all of the vendors that I'm going to be talking about, it's always good to compare prices, but not go with the cheapest. You want good quality, and you want someone who can do it right. So just keep that in mind. Ask for some samples. The second vendor is the illustrator, and that's probably going to be one of your most expensive expenses for a children's book. Of course, the artwork is what really sells a book. It's I hate to tell you, but it's not going to be the story as much as the artwork and the story together. So you want to think about that as you're searching for an illustrator. As you're looking for vendors, especially illustrators and designers, you may be tempted to go to places like Fiverr. Now, I do need to give you a little bit of a warning about Fiverr. This is a website where you can seek out freelancers all around the world for illustrating your book, designing your book, doing other creative things. However, Fiverr has a bit of a reputation among us professional designers and illustrators. You see, yes, you can find professional illustrators and designers on Fiverr. However, they're mixed in with a lot of other people who are just trying to get your money. And the way they do that is by using the same illustrations throughout several books or multiple books. Instead of creating custom illustrations per book, they're using the same artwork in multiple books. Some of the illustrators on Fiverr also take stock images and create scenes and illustrations using those stock images. So they're not even custom illustrations. They are just buying these stock images of the characters, the background, the objects, and just putting it together and selling it as an illustration. This is not the type of quality you want for your children's book. You want to find someone who you can see some of their samples, you can see their portfolio and make sure that the quality that they're doing is up to par with what you want. And also ask for the work in progress. Ask for the sketches or the character development processes that they've done for other authors and make sure that they are giving you what you want. Now, I hope to make a video maybe in the near future where I talk about how to find an illustrator. But I can tell you that I have found both of my illustrators using Instagram and searching for different hashtags. So I encourage you to do that. For both of my books, the illustrators are completely different styles. And so you just want to look for the style that you want, as well as compare the rates. You know, if you get maybe 3 to 5 different illustrators that you really like their work and you like their style, then compare their rates, ask for their portfolio and be sure to look over that. Ask for some work in progress. such as sketches, character development sketches, things like that, so that you can make sure that what they're doing is legit. The third vendor you might be looking for is a designer, such as myself. Now, lots of illustrators will say that they can also lay out, and that means like put in the text for each page of the book and lay out the whole book, the cover and the interior and everything. But what I have found is that most illustrators who say that actually don't have the experience or the know-how to do it correctly and how to complement their art with the right fonts and so forth. So I do encourage you to seek out a designer, someone who can lay out the book properly and then format it for your various printers. Now, when it comes to looking for a designer, it's much like finding an illustrator. You want to hopefully see a portfolio and ask for samples of things they've done, as well as compare their style. You know, designers have different styles as well. So seek out a designer that kind of complements the artwork that you're planning for and your own style for how you want your book to look. The last vendor is the printer, and this is probably going to be one of your more expensive ones. I would say that the two most expensive vendors you will have are the illustrator and the printer. Editing is actually fairly cheap, and then actually the design for your book is going to be minimal compared to the illustrations and the printing. I do recommend getting your books printed at least 1,000 at a time, and even more if you can afford it. And you can run Kickstarter programs to fund the printing of your book, but to be able to get the wholesale rate at a good low rate so that you can then set the retail correctly, you really need to have at least 1,000 books printed. Now, when it comes to printing your book, there are a lot of different options, but the two main options are offset printing, which is what I was just talking about, printing overseas usually, or print on demand. And those are very different techniques. Offset printing is where you pay for 1,000 plus books all at once up front, and that's a big expense. But it also gives you a much higher quality book to sell. Print on demand is an option that you can get through places like Amazon KDP as well as Ingram Spark. And there are no upfront costs. You just receive the profit after the book sells. If you sell a book through Amazon prints the book and gives you the profits after their own fees for printing and selling and all of that. Now, I have to say that the quality is much lower, as well as the profit for each sale is going to be much lower than you would get with an offset printed book. One thing to consider when you're having your books printed is whether you're going to print hardcover or paperback. Now, of course, there's a big difference in cost for getting a hardcover printed versus a paperback. And so you want to think about that. In the US, most people prefer hardcovers. In fact, most people prefer hardcovers without the dust jacket. While in the UK and maybe other parts of the world, paperback is typically what they buy. But now that we are entering a recession, and if the inflation sticks around, we may see a shift in the US from the hardcovers to paperback books. So it's something to think about. Maybe you will offer both. Maybe you'll have your book printed offset as a hardcover, but also offer the paperback as a print-on-demand option. Or maybe you just forego the hardcover and go with paperback, go with the cheaper printing option and make that available and really sell that as the more affordable option to printing hardcover books. There are certain cover treatment options that are only available through offset printing. You can't get these through print-on-demand via KDP or Ingram Spark or any of those. So you just need to be aware of that. And I'm talking about things like dust jackets, spot UV layers, foil on your cover, embossing, debossing, things like that. You can only get through offset printing. So just be aware of those. And those types of things, they cost more, but it brings just like a much higher quality to your book. And so when you're considering cutting down your costs, you may think, well, yeah, I don't need to have embossing. I don't need to have the foil. I don't need to have a dust cover and all these things. They cut down on your expenses. You also have to think that by adding those things, it brings another layer of high quality, makes it seem like a more professional premium book. So it's totally up to you what you think you can afford and what you think you can produce at a good rate to then get that profit on the back end. So you just need to think about what kind of cover treatment options you want to go for. Lots of people don't like dust jackets, but libraries and bookstores, they actually prefer books with dust jackets. So you might want to consider that if you're doing offset printing. These other things like spot UV, like foil, not necessary, but they do add a level of premium quality to your cover. So just consider that when you're printing. And you know what, if you're not going to have a dust jacket, if you're not going to have foil or spot UV or embossing, you may just consider doing a print-on-demand book through Ingram Spark and just collecting the profit on the back end. That might be a good way to prepare for a recession by not having that expense on the front end and paying thousands of dollars to have your books printed, but just receiving almost like a royalty on the back end when the book sells. So those are just some things to consider as you are preparing to publish your first book. Maybe it's not your first book. Maybe you have a few out and you're just wanting to prepare for this recession. Cutting back on expenses or looking for ways that you can cut back on expenses but yet still produce a high quality book. These are some great techniques for doing that. I hope you'll tune in. I hope you'll hit the subscribe button because I actually have a lot more tips to share with you over the next couple of weeks about how you can prepare for a recession as an author. Thanks so much for watching. Now y'all come back when you can stay longer.